just chatting about the poem. We'll just stop at the end of the stanza. And basically, here she says that, she's too preoccupied with life, essentially, to certainly stop it and wait for death. So death, of course, eventually comes to her. She's personifying death here. Death comes by with a carriage, and just as we are born alone, we die alone, and in this carriage, it's just her, death, and eternal time.
Eternal time, right. Second stanza then carries on. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor. Sorry, I got all over there. It's my labor and my leisure too for his civility. Again, probably the same idea here. The interesting thing, labor and leisure, literally it's the end of her life, both the work as well as the pleasure. Again, an aristocratic tone to this. There is no impatience on his part. He of course, he knows no haste. It's coming inevitably. There's no need to rush it.
And I guess when death goes on for
eternity or immortality,
no need to rush.
No. Nope. Then the third stanza, we passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of grazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Again here, pretty much, here you've got the active life. Again, this is what is in the past at this point. When death comes knocking, the anaphora there, if we passed, emphasizes this, long
I think
passage of time.
It's not only passage of time and going through life, but past in an interesting way sort of echoes the idea of passing on, dying. So we've got sort of a little play on meaning there as well.
And past tense, it's all
past tense. And I think that obviously, just to make sure we are set on the literal level, she goes by a school where children are playing. She goes by fields of grain, and they go by the setting sun. And these three things are beginning, middle, and end. Part of someone's life, and obviously symbolic of a life, as well as perhaps being part of her particular life. Yep. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. And that's an interesting thing. Sometimes not even sure what to make of it. So rather, they didn't pass the setting sun, but rather the sun passed them. So there's part of an implication, I guess, that they're going so slowly that it's as if the sun has gone and dipped beyond the horizon.
Yeah, probably. And life is the active agent, of course. So it's not. It's interesting that death comes, but is charitable enough, I guess, to wait because it has nothing. It's really the past that life, rather, that passes us by or leaves us. I think this is the most interesting part, is that it does switch. The active agency here goes. It's no longer death, but in fact life.
Yeah,
life
passes
as leaving us.
And it also brings. She uses the word chill, and it also brings an element of chill to the poem here. That the dew on the ground, it's bringing a chill to her, especially since her gown is only gossamer. And her tippet is only tulle. I hope you probably looked up at some point that you know what a gown is, but gossamer is a fine web-like substance. You could call it what you call cobwebs, but it's a silk garment that's light web-like and fine. That's kind of neat because not only is she talking about how light and essentially inappropriate for the weather her garments are, but there's also an echo or sense of it being like a cobweb, sort of reminiscent of the grave. And tulle, a tippet is a shawl or a scarf that you'd use to cover your shoulders. And tulle, again, is a very fine material made of silk often and wouldn't protect you from the elements. Just to add to this, I don't know if we want to get into this detail, but there's some sense that she's essentially dressing for a wedding, because wedding veils are often made of this gossamer or tulle. So there's a sense that she's dressed for a wedding, even though she's going to her own funeral. But a young girl who died before marriage, sometimes they're, in some cultures or traditions, are buried in wedding gowns. So there's a little, maybe it's appropriate or maybe it's ironic. It
Yeah.
could be both, and I think probably both.
Okay, the penultimate stanza then. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Again, I mean, the references to death become a little bit more overt here with the gravesite. Probably the irony here that the house and all of life is being turned upside down, and now it's buried beneath the ground for all eternity. There's nothing there. The life fullness of a home, of a house is now turned upside down, just as I guess her clothing is. If it is in fact a bride's outfit that's turned into this ghostly, dead, ethereal quality, so too is the home and the house, and you've got the gravesite there.
Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. And since that time, and it's been a long time, she's writing, the speaker has been dead for a long time, and yet it feels like nothing. It's been a long time since she first realized that, this is where we're going. We're going on this eternal carriage ride.
To death, yep, to the end. This is another weird part. It's since into centuries and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horse's head. Something, even that last day of life, presumably.
Right.
All of this death feels shorter than the day, and I think you have to ask yourself, well, why? It's not. This must not be any longer purely chronological, but something more qualitative than quantitative. That something in that day of life, even though it was the very last moments, had a more rich, complex fullness than even
Than
death.
this boring sort of passage through
Yes.
death.
No matter
It's
how
interesting,
chivalrous, no
though,
matter how aristocratic.
because you could look at it so many different ways, because at the end she says, it's been eternity, but it seems so short. I mean, normally we say that for things that are enjoyable. Like, wow, it's been a long time, but it went by so quickly. So that would imply that this passage through eternity isn't bad. And which could be saying that day I figured it out. That day I figured out that I was going to die was so long. And almost unbearably long. But I think she
Okay.
wants it both ways, though.
Yeah, I think so.
I think
I think it's interesting because in the end, that's maybe what makes this poem the most interesting is that Dickinson often deals with this idea of death, but doesn't get bogged down in it. It ends up being a celebration for life. Of course, with her, it's probably something to do with imagination, the ability to create poetry while alive. And I guess there's something about even that day that was where she realized that death was out there. Maybe that was the day she could also begin to imagine it in a creative sense, or at least write something like a poem about it that gives it, imbues it with a little bit more weight, more gravity than what we typically think is the most grave matter, to pardon the pun, but death, here we are.
In fact, there's a critic, if you go to the YouTube channel, or you're on the YouTube channel, but one of the additional videos is a very long, hour and 44-minute discussion of Emily Dickinson, and the critic's name, I think, is Alice Quinn, but she talks about an episode in Emily Dickinson's life when she was very young, and a neighbor was very sick on his deathbed, and she went and asked her mother if she could see the boy. She wanted to see him. She wanted to encounter that. And this critic compares it to another famous writer, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wanted to view his wife after she had